Okay, another Thursday night football game in Pittsburgh and the Steelers. I want eke out a win as a favorite at home against the Titans and rookie quarterback Will Levis. We will dive into the Steelers offense. Mike Tomlin, Mike Vrabel somehow gets a team full of randoms to just compete on a yearly basis. Pretty incredible. And some thoughts on the quarterback, as well as just some other big games this week. I mean, it's a fantastic slate. We start bright and early in the morning in Germany, Chiefs, Dolphins, some thoughts on the Bills and the Cowboys as well with some big games coming up. So a lot of football talk right here. But first, subscribe to the podcast wherever you may listen. Apple, Spotify, we have you covered. If you're watching this on a little thing we call YouTube, hammer that like button, subscribe to the page, and make sure you leave a comment and share it with your friends. TheVolume.com, we got merch, we got gear. Go check out TheVolume.com. We got FlexFit 3-and-out hats. And yeah, I appreciate everyone's supporting the show. Keep hammering the like buttons and subscribing to the podcast. But first, before we dive in to a little football talk, do you want to go to a football game? Do you want to go to an NFL game, a college football game, maybe a college football playoff game, maybe an NBA game? Well, I got you covered. Download a little app that happens to be the official ticketing app of this podcast called Gametime. And when you download the Gametime app, search any event you want to go to, concerts and comedy shows as well. Hammer a little promo code John. That's my name, John, John, and get $20 off your first pair of tickets. The app is extremely easy to use. Anything you want to go to, you click on the event. It has an interactive map of where you want to sit. The price point gives you a view so you can tell the angle in which you can see how close you are to either the stage or the field. Cannot recommend them enough. I've used Gametime all year long. So have all my friends, and so have many of you. So when you download the Gametime app, go to an event, promo code John. Okay, tonight. Let's face it, I wouldn't call tonight the best game, as a lot of these Thursday night games are. As many of you hit me up in the DMs and the tweets, you said Al Michaels screwed up about 3 times within 5 minutes, mispronouncing names, calling first downs when they're short. Par for the course now. Love Al, legend, still a pretty rough listen. Coming off one of his better games last week. Today was rough. Now, the venue, Pittsburgh at night, place is rocking. If you love football, hard to not like the terrible towels. You got JJ in the house. Let's start with the Steelers. Simply put, like, I loved them coming into this season. I thought they could compete with the AFC. They cannot. And it all comes down to their offense. Now, I don't pretend to be Bill Walsh, Mike Holmgren, or Mike Shanahan when it comes to offensive scheme. But clearly, they have enough talent, right? With Deontay Johnson back, Pickens is just a fantastic physical freak. I'm not the biggest Najee Harris, but he's more than serviceable, especially with the young guy Warren behind him. They have firepower, and they struggle. Honestly, the crazy part about the Steelers, and it was like this last year when they were kind of making their comeback after the very, very slow start, their quarterback can look terrible the majority of the game, and then he can have a fantastic drive in the fourth quarter to ultimately win them the game. The problem, that works against the Titans, who are clearly not a playoff team, not going anywhere, despite being very competitive, despite having some, kind of a random squad right now. But here's the problem. In that conference, you have to be, in the division, you have 2 superstar players. I mean, the way Joe Burrow's looked the last couple of weeks, he looks like the best player in the league. Lamar Jackson is having an MVP-type season. Those guys just signed enormous deals. And your defense, I give so much respect to the Steelers. They have been consistently able my entire life. I remember a kid going to Super Bowl parties in the 90s with the Steelers and Lloyd and Kirkland and just Bill Cowher. It's like just defense. I didn't grow up on the Steel Curtain, but it felt like that in the 90s. And then once they got Tomlin and the teams they built in the late 2000s and the early teens, they were just so physical, and they've done it again. I mean, they have easily the best duo rushing the passer. TJ Watt's top 2 or 3, probably a non-quarterback in the NFL. And Highsmith, think how many teams that guy would be their best pass rusher. Minkah didn't even play tonight. Hayward back. Their defense, personnel-wise, is awesome. Joey Porter, I was watching Joey Porter Jr. tonight, and, Hopkins, I think right now if he ran a 40 and I ran a 40, he'd beat me, but I don't think he'd beat me by much. I mean, I think the guy's running a 5.0 40, and that speaks to his greatness as a wide receiver. He's never been fast, but his physicality, his ability at the point of attack. I mean, last week, one of his touchdowns, he literally grabbed the corner, threw him down. A lot of, I think Bolden, Anquan was a better player, but I think they have some similar characteristics as they've been able to dominate, never being able to run, especially playing outside. It's one thing playing slot, but you can put them outside and they can still be productive. But that defense is borderline championship worthy. I mean, definitely when healthy, that is a big time, competitive defense that can take you on a run, right? But offensively, obviously you move the offensive coordinator down to the sideline. It just looks off. They've scored over 25 points this season one time. That's just not going to be good enough. How are you going to feel confident? Let's assume they don't win the division and the Ravens do. They're going to be let's say they're a wild card team. They're going on the road, maybe to Baltimore or maybe to Kansas City. How are you going to feel good with that offense winning a playoff game on the road, especially multiple? And this is the problem. Like, they have the culture, the ethos as a franchise, the ability to equip their team with talented guys all over the place. Yet it feels like they're kind of running in no man's land, right? Like they are kind of the same team year in, year out. Like, it doesn't look any different really than last year. Let's face it. Some of their wins down the stretch were low scoring games where the quarterback led them on a game winning drive. Yet they don't play very well. Like last week against watching Joe Burrow against the 49ers, start to finish. He's like, we're going to fucking eviscerate you. You watch Lamar Jackson when the Ravens are on, we are going to destroy you. And obviously both those teams do not have the defense of the Steelers. If this offense to me felt middle of the road, but there's a potency which they should have, and they show spurts of it because of how talented their wide receivers are and how explosive Warren can be, but start to finish in a game that they just do not have it. Now, they are playing a team that Mike Vrabel's a big-time coach, man. I mean, they trade away last week, or a couple weeks ago, their team captain. Henry is who knows how old on his last legs. Their offensive line is patchwork. They're playing with a second-round rookie in his second start on a short week, and they have a chance to win the game. That franchise, like, I watched those two teams, I'm like, I don't think the difference, the gap between these two teams is that wide in terms of the product on the field. Yet the Steelers have way better players. Now, I'm not trying to diminish Mike Tomlin. I think for a guy that is just the team leader, right? Doesn't call the offense, doesn't call the defense, is just kind of standing there looking a lot like Mike Vrabel. I just think that Mike gets his teams to overachieve and gets more out of it consistently. Like, would the team be as good if you gave Mike Tomlin a team that didn't have the talent? Like, that's part of, they have winning records all the time. Well, yeah, they are one of, if not the best drafting team in the NFL. And here's the other thing. The problem is when you draft a quarterback who is not going to become a star, right? It's easy when you get, even early on, if the guy struggles and you see the talent in a Josh Allen or whatever, Justin Herbert. It's another thing when you do the Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett. And if your team's good enough, he's serviceable, but it's like, that's what you're going to roll with. Like, this is going to be your quarterback for the next several years. Like, this is what you're dealing with. Like, let's face it. If you're a Steeler fan right now and you could take a step back and be objective, what quarterback would you rather take for the next 3 years? Will Levis or Kenny Pickett? Do you even need to think that long about it? And I'm not claiming Will Levis is going to be some top 10 quarterback, but the talent in the two guys, the gap between the arm is extremely wide. And you'd be like, well, he's got a big arm. What about the poise? Like, you watch Will Levis, it's not like he's scared back there. It's not like he's freaking out when there's a pass rush. He showed over and over he can slide. Now, ultimately, the pick at the end of the game, lost him the football game. But what was he supposed to do? I mean, they had no timeouts. You had to push the ball. I don't hate a pick there. And they're basically just running verticals the whole way down the field the entire drive. But when I watch those two quarterbacks and you're watching one guy make a second start and the other guy making, however many starts Kenny Pickett's made now, 15, 20, I don't even think it's close. Like, I don't even have to think. And I'm not like pounding the table as some huge Will Levis backer, but what we saw Will Levis last week and what we saw tonight, short week, look who he's throwing to. Hopkins can't run. Burks is, thank God it looks okay. It was pretty clear that when he hit his head, on the deep shot toward the end of the game, it looked like he was knocked out before he even finished rolling. But he's not a very good player. And, it's hard to just hand Henry the ball over and over when they know you're going to hand it to him, right? And your passing game's not that explosive. So I'm impressed with Will Levis. I know they lost the game, but I also think that was very eye-opening of like, your quarterback's not even as good as their quarterback. And we don't even know how good their quarterback is. So I think the Steelers, their problem shows itself basically every week. And it's going to be their downfall. They cannot score points. Their offense, despite having sometimes when an offense struggles to score, like let's use the Patriots, for example. It's like, yeah, their quarterback is average and they don't have any talent around him. So when you put that combination, well, okay, if Kenny Pickett's average, there's no disputing the talent that the Steelers have given their quarterbacks my entire life outside, right? They're the best wide receiver drafting organization in the league. Might not even be a close second. And I just don't see it really. And I don't see it, especially from a standard and a franchise that, kind of holds themselves to these other teams that are competing to win Super Bowls because they have no shot. Honestly, I'd be surprised unless their defense scores multiple touchdowns or creates like 4 or 5 turnovers if this team wins a playoff game. So I think we just saw the same thing over and over with the Steelers, and their offense is going to be, their downfall. NBA fans, the wait is over. Basketball is back, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, is celebrating with an unbeatable offer. New customers can score $200 instantly in bonus bets for throwing down $5 on the NBA. Win or lose, it doesn't matter. You'll start the season with an instant dub. And with DraftKings parlays, everyone's got a shot at even bigger basketball wins. String together multiple bets from the same game or build your parlay across multiple games for a shot at making your payday even sweeter. Basketball's more fun when you're in on the action. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code JOHN. New customers can get $200 in bonus bets instantly for betting just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. Let's fire around the league because I do think this week on paper is just pretty fantastic. Now, sometimes you get great matchups. Remember Sunday Night Football, whatever it was, week 5, Cowboys, Niners, and the game sucks immediately. Bills, Miami Dolphins, same thing. So you never know. And sometimes random games turned out to be fantastic. But Chiefs, Dolphins in Germany, Bills, Bengals, and Cowboys, Eagles, it's just, it doesn't get much better. Let's start with the Chiefs and Dolphins. I do think there are some big nights and big days on tap for a couple coaches and a couple quarterbacks. And when you look at the Dolphins, and people, for whatever reason, and again, when I say people, it might be like 10 people, 5 on Twitter and 5 on Instagram, are always like, Middlekauff, you're always shitting on the Dolphins. Their offensive line was missing this guy and this guy. Even when healthy, your offensive line stinks. So, let's not act like you got Larry Allen, Trent Williams, and Lane Johnson when healthy. Your offensive line is a major, major liability. Your offensive play caller, who's also your head coach, has done a fantastic job really for 2 years of coaching around that and getting rid of the football quickly. But as a franchise, your team, when they play lesser opponents, looks excellent. You guys last week took over in the second half against the Patriots. But you played 2 real teams. You got your doors blown in one game against the Bills. And the Eagles thoroughly outclassed you, especially in the second half of that game. Now you're playing the Chiefs, coming off a loss. I think it's fair to say Andy and Mahomes are going to have the boys ready. Now, a huge part of this week, I always a little uncomfortable betting. I usually stay away from these games. One, I guess in Arizona, we're on like half Pacific Standard Time, half Mountain Time. So the clocks roll back this upcoming week, but we stay forward. So this game kicks off for me at 7:30 a.m. A lot of times when it's random games, like I'm not getting up super early to watch, the Falcons play the Panthers. Who cares? Or typically like the Jags play the Texans. Like no one cares. But this game is awesome. And I plan on being up for kickoff, 7:30 a.m., which isn't quite 6:30. You guys have it nice on the East Coast. But I expect Andy and Mahomes to have the boys ready. Now, when it comes to the Dolphins, like, if I'm going to take you seriously, and I said this last time when you played the Eagles, like, I'm not going to pick you to win a playoff game. Like, whenever I see you against good teams, you lose. And honestly, it's not that close. So this is another opportunity, like the Eagles, like the Bills, play a team that's averaging 13, 14 wins a season, that's going to Super Bowls. Just look good. Just look. Hell, you don't even need to win the game. Just not be like, yeah, that was, they outclassed you. And that's happened twice now. Now, the other thing is like, oh, Jalen Ramsey hasn't, well, he's back now. So you got your star corner. And there's a reason. Listen, I like Jalen. Have a lot of respect for any high-level corners that like to tackle. Most great corners aren't into tackling. And that goes back to like primetime. Now, he was so great, who cares? I wouldn't call Revis some big hitter. The knock on Sauce Gardner? Not really into hitting. Jalen Ramsey will lower his shoulder and play like Richard Sherman. A lot of respect for him as a player. There was a reason you got him for a third-round pick. And I know he had a pick last week against Mac Jones. Little different animal this week against Patrick Mahomes. So I think this is a big moment for Mike McDaniel and Tua to be viewed as like a real playoff contender. They've had 2 shots so far this season, and it hasn't gone well, really at all. So let's see in Germany, who knows how this crowd's going to be. I don't even know what to expect beside coming off one of their worst performances of the Andy Mahomes era, the first divisional road loss of Mahomes' career. I expect the Chiefs to be ready. So this is a big, big test for the Dolphins. Don't miss the action this weekend when the NFL heads to Germany for the Frankfurt games. These games will air on NFL Network and stream on NFL Plus. For a limited time, Verizon customers can get Netflix and NFL Plus for just $25 a month with Plus Play. That's $120 in annual savings. Plus Play is a platform where Verizon customers can shop, manage, and save on the subscriptions you already love, like NFL Plus. With NFL Plus Premium, you get access to live games on mobile, NFL Red Zone, and NFL Network, which means you can catch the Frankfurt games and save. Just go to Verizon.com/NFL to bundle and save before the games. Hurry, this offer ends soon. I'll never forget sitting in my office last year, playoffs, week 2, which I would argue in theory in the playoffs, or excuse me, the second round of the playoffs, the divisional round, is the best matchups year in, year out. You're getting a bunch of teams that have Super Bowl ability playing each other. And we were robbed is the wrong word because of what happened to DeMar, but the game didn't happen. So there was a lot of hype coming into this game. The Bills had been really close. The Bengals had already gotten over the hump the previous year, beating the Chiefs and getting to the Super Bowl. The Bengals beat the shit out of the Bills. And I went back today and I looked at the box score because I remember watching it thinking like, this is crazy. They are getting shoved around. And a lot of Bills fans and a lot of people that just, they're an easy team to like, right? Who doesn't like rooting for Josh Allen? Who doesn't like watching that team when they're rolling? But one knock can be one physical run game sometimes is very hit or miss. And in that game, they got the ball ran down their throat. The Bengals ran for 172 yards. And it was just, there was like, it would be like a heavyweight fighting, a lightweight. It didn't even feel like the two teams belonged on the same field. It was pretty embarrassing by the Bills. When you think about their worst loss, like it was a gut punch, the loss they had against the Chiefs when the Chiefs went 50 yards in the 2 plays. But that was just like terrible defensive play calling. 2 all-time great Hall of Famers doing freaky shit. Remember, like Kelsey and Tyreek were pointing at each other at the line. That sucked. I'm not trying to advocate that you should hold your head high after that loss. But to me, that loss was a lot different than last year. Now, if you want to say, hey, that snowstorm came, you had to go to Detroit, DeMar situation, there was a lot going on, no doubt about it. But they made you say uncle. And to me, this is a big game for 2 guys. One, like what I witnessed out of Joe Burrow last week was like, motherfuckers, I'm the best player in the league. Now, yeah, I would say Patrick Mahomes is his resume, but if Joe's going to play like that, this is both these two guys, right? If Mahomes is kind of entrenched based on his resume, based on the production as the best player and best quarterback in the NFL, on a given week, it's usually one of these two guys going 2-3. And I think you need Josh Allen to find a way, because let's face it, defensively, they have taken a lot of hits, right? They lose Milano, they lose Trey White, they lose Jones. They trade this week for Rasul Douglas. Saw a headline today when Gutekunst called him to say he was traded. He thought it was like a prank. He hung up on him. He didn't believe him. And then I guess the president, Mike Murphy, called him to thank him for all of his efforts. So listen, you were definitely getting a more than serviceable corner, but I guess he said after, like, him and Aaron Jones spent some time, they cried together. So sometimes you never know, like, it is a business. But sometimes if you don't think you're going to be traded, it's one thing if you're Chase Young or Montez Sweat, where it's kind of clear, you've been on the block for a while. It's another thing where it kind of comes out of nowhere. So what you get out of this player, but I think there's a huge week for Sean McDermott, who, we said Leslie Frazier stepped away. Bullshit. Leslie Frazier was fired, right? Leslie Frazier was fired. It's like Bob Myers. I'm watching the Lakers-Clippers game yesterday. Bob Myers like, I need a break from basketball. I'm worn out. I'm tired. No, you're just tired of working for Joe Lacob. You don't need a break. I'm watching you call the Lakers-Clippers. You're still a basketball junkie. You didn't want to leave. You just couldn't do this anymore. Like, you just didn't want to be the GM of the Warriors. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Sean McDermott fired Leslie Frazier, and he took over. Well, what I saw, and maybe it was just coming off a bye against the Niners, they just gave their A game. But, like, if that's the version of the offense moving forward, like T. Higgins looked weird. He was banged up, looked fantastic last week. Joe Mixon looked like fucking Jerome Bettis last week. So this is a huge test for Sean McDermott. And to me, Josh Allen, like, part of being whoever you are in your era, like Peyton Manning, Roethlisberger, or when I was young, like the Favres, the Marinos, the Elways, sometimes your team just needs you to carry you. And that's what obviously the Bengals need with Joe Burrow. And that's what the Bills need with Josh Allen. So I can't wait to watch this game. I love watching these two quarterbacks. I think there's a ton of pressure on the Bills. Now, obviously, from a record standpoint, because they started slow, the Bengals can't really afford some else, right? So this is also a big game for them. I can't wait. And then the other game is Eagles-Cowboys. And I'll say this. I do respect when Dallas, when they get momentum, and they've done it 3 or 4 times this year against the Giants, they did it last week against the Rams. They beat the living piss out of you. They did it one other game where was the Jets, when they're scoring defensive touchdowns, when they're scoring special teams touchdowns, they look like a college team. They're all dancing in the end zone. You got no clue who's scoring. It's like dudes blocking punts, dudes returning safeties, the safety punt for 40. It looks awesome. And that's not usually how it looks when you play other good teams. And there was so much hype coming into that 49er game where it's like, listen, Dallas might not win the game, but if you just lose 28-24 and you just go 12 rounds, you're like, listen, a lot of respect for you. But they got destroyed. So now, same type deal, playing the Eagles, and you can be like, well, Dak's played the Eagles really well. Yeah, there is a tangible pressure right now on this team. I think if the Eagles lose this game, whatever. They've proven last year, blew out the Giants, knocked out Purdy, could have easily won the Super Bowl. They clearly look like the most talented team in the NFC. Now, the question with Jalen and the knee injury is definitely a valid concern, but it hasn't really hurt them this year so far. When's the last time Mike McCarthy had a win where you're like, hell yeah. Like, hell yeah. That's our coach. That's our guy. He kind of needs one of those. And this would be huge. I think there is, and Dak's played a lot better these last couple weeks. I thought that Charger game for the first time this season, in a game that was tight, showed some life. I'll never forget the drive where he scrambled, threw it to Pollard, later the touchdown to Cooks. Like, when he's a playmaker, I think the Cowboys are pretty dangerous. Now, the Eagles, I think top to bottom, more and more talented, but we say this all the time. We were talking about with the Patriots. Divisional games, I don't care if you're an undefeated team or a team that hasn't won. You are not intimidated by the other team's players. You are used to playing all those guys, right? Like Micah Parsons knows Malatu, the Australian left tackle, and Lane Johnson, the strengths and the weaknesses, right? No different than CeeDee Lamb knows their corners, vice versa too. So you are very comfortable playing the team. I think just a ton of pressures on the Cowboys. And this would be, like, I don't know if they get that much credit for a tight game, right? Because then the Eagles would have a multi-game lead. But all of a sudden you win this game and, you have the same amount of losses as Philly. You're going to start. I picked the Cowboys. I tried to be bold at the beginning of the season just to win this division. And then obviously after that Arizona game, I was like, God, is this team gritty enough? Like there's a grit sometimes when you watch them. And sometimes it's as simple as like some of their bad losses, Dak just throws awful turnovers, right? Throws awful interceptions. To me, if Dak doesn't turn over the ball, my question for this team, like, are they gritty enough? Can they get into a game that's 17-17 going into the fourth quarter and win against a team that could easily win the Super Bowl? Because if they can, then I do think you got to okay, I take this team seriously. Because if you just take some of their blowout wins, their ceiling, and I understand these teams are shitty, but the way in which they can just overwhelm you, they definitely have the talent, right? They have the explosion on offense. Defensively, if they can get a little lead, their pass rush is just so daunting. Their coordinator on defense is elite in Dan Quinn. So I think all the pressure's on the Cowboys, and I think McCarthy, even more than Dak. I mean, let's face it, Dak has had some big wins over the course of his career. Like, when's McCarthy truly won a big game as the Cowboys head coach? Definitely not in the playoffs, right? I'm sorry, I'm not counting a god-awful Tampa Bay team in the wild card round. And last but not least, bold take of the week brought to you by Guinness. A couple weeks ago, after the Trojans, the USC Trojans, got blown out by Notre Dame. Emmanuel Acho threw out a take that Caleb Williams should quit, should stop playing. Like, what's he playing for? Even though at the time they hadn't lost a Pac-12 game. And then the following week, they lose to Utah, to a third string pig farming quarterback that, if you watch the Oregon game, is not a very good player. He had been benched multiple times this season. They are still alive to represent the conference as one of the two teams in the Pac-12. And it started last year and it's happening again. It's not represented by forever, a lot like the Big Ten was represented by divisions. The South play the North. Now they just take the two best teams. USC is playing Washington at home. And then the following week, they have Oregon. And then they finish with their rival UCLA. They're going to be underdogs, obviously, in all three games. If they win this game, next week against Oregon is a massive game because Oregon, like USC, both have one conference loss. And the winner of that game would be in great position, obviously, to represent the conference, in the Pac-12 championship game against another one or two loss team. And to me, if USC loses this game, and I don't know, I didn't watch any of it. I just was following on my phone because I don't have the Pac-12 network anymore because of YouTube TV. The Trojans easily could have lost. I mean, easily could have lost to a below average Cal football team. The final score is 50-49. Cal went for 2 to win the game. Terrible play call. But if they would have got 2, they would have lost. And I do think there was a chance that Caleb Williams would not have played anymore. I do believe my bold take of the week is if they lose to Washington, which they easily could, I got news for you. I'm going to take the Huskies, that Caleb Williams will not play anymore for USC. Now, when Emmanuel Acho threw the takeout, I thought it was crazy because they still had a lot on the line. I will defend him if he stops now. The next game would be at Oregon. It would suck as a fan. I wouldn't want him to, but I do understand from a business perspective, the team's imploding. The season is over. He's not going to play in the bowl game. What's the point of playing Oregon and UCLA, two really good defenses, where he could get injured? He has a lot of money on the line. Some of these takes, the more and more I've thought about it, is like he could return to school, is the dumbest fucking take in the history of takes. Even if USC could round up $10 million to pay the guy, when you are drafted number 1 overall, you sign a $38 million contract and get a $27 million signing bonus. So the money is not comparable. Your clock also starts to get your second contract. But I do think my bold take of the week is if the Trojans lose this week to Washington, who obviously have, the road to the playoff is well in front of them, this will be Caleb Williams' last game as a collegiate quarterback. And I will defend him if that is the case. So that's my bold take of the week, brought to you by Guinness. Gather your friends, raise your glasses, toast to win. Guinness Draft Stout, imported by Diageo Beer Company, USA, New York, New York. Please drink responsibly.